Hello, good evening, everyone. I'm Rabbi Daniel Brenner, and it is my pleasure to be here tonight with three amazing panelists. We are joined tonight by Ari Merrill, a trans teen in New York City, who is also a former Moving Traditions Koleinu Fellow, and Rabbi Dr. Michaelson, and a pediatrician and parent of trans young adults, Dr. Katya Gerwein. So I'm very excited about jumping into the conversation with all of them. But before we do that, I just want to say a little bit about teens and what they're going through right now. Our last Raising Up Teens webinar was really focused on some new research that was funded by the Be Well initiative of the Jewish Federations. And they found, after speaking with about 4,000 teens, that right now it is very difficult to not only be a teen, but to be a Jewish teen. They found that being a Jew was almost as stressful as the academic stress that teens are faced with in thinking about how they're going to get into college. So this is an incredibly challenging time for teens. And as Moving Traditions works with all the different institutions that serve teens, like schools and camps and synagogues and JCCs, and creates experience that explore teens' lives, we are concerned about the social, emotional, and spiritual well-being of teens. One of the things that we do in Moving Traditions is we focus on three Hebrew words that are words that describe inner qualities: shlemut, chesed, and tzedek. And when teens develop shlemut, inner well-being and confidence, then they can act with chesed, they can act with kindness towards others and building community, and collectively pursue tzedek, pursue justice. That is what we are hoping for every teen in the Jewish community. And tonight we're focused specifically on trans and queer teens and thinking about it from the parenting perspective that we have at Raising Up Teens. So we're going to jump into that now, and I just want to introduce our first two panelists who are going to help us get this conversation started. So welcome, Ari, and welcome, Jay. So nice to have you both with us. And let me just say a little bit about the two panelists and why they are the perfect panelists for tonight. So Ari, in our conversations earlier, I not only learned that you are active as a trans teen and educating other people about trans teens, but also you're a writer and a thinker and are an aspiring journalist in some ways, and like you are thinking about the world and have a unique perspective on it. And also, it was just amazing for me to hear your story about your Jewish journey and your involvement in Kol Koleinu. So welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. It's really cool to be here.
Awesome. And Jay, what can I say about you? You are a lawyer, a law professor, and maybe a minor TV personality, queer activist, writer, rabbi, and you are a fellow Jewish parent and my neighbor and friend. So it's just wonderful to have you as part of this evening tonight. I want to just say a little bit about where I'm coming from because I realize that I am a cisgender, heteronormative dad, and I'm trying to approach tonight's topic really with a Benzoma mindset, which means that Benzoma famously said, Mihu chacham halomed mikol adam, who is wise, a person who learns from every other person. And I really want to just say, I want to start this in a personal way, and I want to hear a little bit more about your stories before we start to talk a little bit about the cultural and political issues of the hour. So Ari, I want to start with you. And just tell me a little bit about like your current life, your family, your school, and like where you're at right now and what's next for you.
Yeah. So
I
I'm a
know
se-
that's a lot, but let's try it.
I'll try to keep it all straight. So I live in Manhattan and I'm a senior at Hunter College High School, which if you live in New York, you might know. I have a little brother. He's in 10th grade at the same school. I have my parents. I have a dog. Um, and
Awesome.
so, obviously, I'm doing all the sort of normal senior stuff with my classes, and college acceptances are coming in and all that sort of stuff that you would expect. And then, as you mentioned, extracurricular wise, I am co-editor in chief of my school newspaper. I am co-president of the Trans Non-Binary Club, and work on some like initiatives that we've started, like a educational program for the eighth graders. So all that sort of stuff.
Oh,
Uh,
that's interesting to me. I'm going to ask you about that a little bit later.
yeah, we actually just did our rounds for this year, so it's fresh in my mind.
Excellent.
Um, and Yeah, I'm sure everyone here reads the news. You kind of all know what executive orders have been coming out of the White House. And so many of them do target trans people, often on the basis of misinformation. So that's definitely something that's been front of mind for me, especially as I'm
Understood.
deciding sort of where to go to college. Um,
Totally.
Many colleges are, especially the sort of small liberal arts colleges that I'm looking at, are quite progressive, but the states they're in maybe less so. So it's definitely a factor.
Okay, we're going to get into that in a little bit, but thank you, Ari. So when we were talking earlier, you told me a little bit about your Jewish journey. So I want to just ask if you would go back to like your 12-year-old self, and just think about like when you were getting ready for B mitzvah, like what was going on, and just share a little bit about your search for a Jewish community.
Right. So I did a lot of sort of after school programs when I was younger. My brother and I did. And I never sort of really clicked at any of them, did each for like a year or two, tried some different ones. It never really felt like my place. I always felt a little out of the loop. So I took a break from it, after I want to say fifth or sixth grade. And it was, my high school starts in seventh grade, so there was a lot of new stuff that I was doing then anyways. Um, and then there was COVID, so that was sort of a natural break. And then coming out of COVID, which, for me was a little late for a typical B mitzvah, but I realized then that I wanted to sort of find a way back into it. So I started with my parents looking at various synagogues in my neighborhood, particularly ones that like I had researched online and were known for being very progressive. And I found Romemu, which is just a couple blocks from me and was a great environment for me. And they got me on some sort of, track where I was like, catching up on the basics and also studying for my B mitzvah concurrently. And they got me there, and I found that they were very flexible, and kind, and they've been, supportive even since my B mitzvah. They've let me use space in their building to run this program that I started, where we do like after school bilingual help for migrants from Latin America. So they've
Amazing.
just been all around really, great, progressive, supportive. I volunteered at the soup kitchen there. Like, it's just a great place. So that ended up working out well for me.
That's awesome. All right, Jay, I want to just turn it to you for a moment. Um, I want to just throw out the same question. Just tell us a little bit about your current life, what you're up to, your professional activities, your family, whatever it is that you want to share.
Sure, and thank you. It's an honor to be here. Yeah, I mean, these days I've been working for 20 years at the intersection of politics and law on the one hand, and spirituality and religion on the other. So that's taken a lot of different forms. I worked as a religious queer activist professionally for 10 years. I started two queer Jewish organizations and did a lot of work, wrote a book on that subject, and did a lot of work in that area. And then spent a while working kind of as a journalist on the one hand, and also teaching meditation on the other. And the joke was, at first those seemed really disparate, the nature of the human mind and politics. But then in 2016, with the first Trump election, it became really clear that these were closely related subjects. And that's true even more so now, I think, as you said in the beginning, Dan, with kind of the crisis of meaning, and the crisis of loneliness, and all the assorted other mental health crises that this country is in. And then for the last couple of years, I've been working again at the same intersection, but around law, spirituality, and psychedelics as well. So I just hosted a really large symposium on psychedelics and monotheistic religions, and gaining legal recognition for what's already happening in religious traditions. But I've never left my kind of queer activist roots. And so where I've had the opportunity in these last few years, I've tried to use the platform that I have. I'm on CNN every so often. I write for Rolling Stone and other publications to kind of lift up stories. To me as a sort of regular white cis gay, I don't have like the most compelling transgender journey story. So it's really about centering people who do and lifting up stories that are often excluded or certainly marginalized in mainstream media. And so I've tried in a little way to do that just over the last year. But, in my life, yeah, I'm married with a kid out in the suburbs now. So, yeah.
Right. All right. So let's do exactly that. Let's center the voice of somebody who is living as a trans person and having trans experience and navigating the world as a teenager. So, Ari, you mentioned that this is impacting your college search. Let's just start there. Tell us a little bit about like how does the current social, political, cultural climate influence what's going on when you're thinking about your future?
Sure. So to give a little sort of anecdote about the college search, I'm lucky enough to get to go visit some of the colleges that I'm interested in. And one of the colleges that I visited with my dad is Oberlin, which is out in Ohio. And Oberlin is known for being a very progressive, very queer-friendly, small liberal arts college. But when, like, we were traveling from the airport to the college, the taxi driver who picked my dad and I up ended up like very quickly on this rant about trans people and gay people, and it was just a whole thing, like not knowing that I was literally there, a trans gay person sitting in his back seat. So it just kind of makes you think, no matter how accepting the college may be, I want to feel safe getting to the airport to go home. And it's those little things that it's just like every decision or every place you go is sort of part of a network of larger communities. None of them are, college campuses are probably one of the most like insular little communities you'll get, and yet they're still not completely isolated. So it's just that extra little thing that you have to take into consideration: laws state by state, the culture outside of the college, um, just sort of an extra worry in what can already be a complicated or difficult decision. Um, is there, I guess also, I mean, I just there's like so many examples, like I just started my medical transition, and of course, President Trump was saying various things about what he will and won't allow legally, and then luckily the New York Attorney General was very brave and sort of reminded New York hospitals that they have a duty to serve trans people as well. But it just sort of, you never know how that's going to play out and what your access to healthcare is going to look like. My legal name change just went through, and so I can get some state documents but not some certain national documents, then it's like a whole legal mess. So just all those sort of little things that other people might not think about, like what name can I get on my driver's license, or like is my gender marker on my passport going to match my gender marker on my whatever. Just all those little extra considerations.
So Jay, you just heard a litany of examples of things that are changing. When you think, and I know that there are so many things that are happening on a national level, on a state level, even on school district level, there are so many things that are happening. Some of those things seem to be, I would say, not thought through very much and all about like the show, but some of those things actually have teeth and I think are going to really impinge on the rights of um, teenagers and really all of us on all of our rights. What do you see as the things that are really changing that we really need to pay attention to as we shift from um, this moment where like I just happen to know that with passports, for example, we had X, but that was like very short-lived, and now we're living in a different era. What are the things that are really changing, really shifting very quickly, and then what is going to be fought out in the courts?
So thanks. I struggled a little bit in preparing my answer to this question, after we talked about it, because there are so many things happening that running through the laundry list really is gonna be a little overwhelming. And yet I decided to run through the laundry list. And the reason for that, we'll have time for Q&A and we'll have time to dive into any of these. But I do think it's really of value, and I'm following these laws quite closely. I'm writing on them, and these legal changes, a lot are being, I would say, contested in the courts, and some will fail, but others will succeed and will stand. And so I think certainly if I were a parent of a young person, or if I were trans myself, these would be kind of top of mind. So I'm gonna, at the risk of, kind of being overwhelming, I'll just go through some of these. And then first, like big picture, I want to frame this as what M. Gesson in the New York Times called the denationalizing of trans people, which is to say, making trans people legally stateless. You mentioned the X mark on the passport. That's like the tip of the iceberg. Trans people should be very cautious about leaving the country because they may not be able to get back in if they have that gender marker. But it's also a catch-22 because if you have a gender on one document and not on another, that's a problem. If you don't, quote unquote, look like your gender, which the government is now defining, the federal government is defining as, quote, sex assigned at birth, that is also a problem. So there's no space, right? There's no place like, oh, I have to do this instead of that. The point is that there's no space. And I see this less almost about rights, although it is that obviously, as just about existence and basic human dignity. And that's what's being attacked and what we're fighting back against, which we will get to. Okay, so there's a ban on medical care for minors, trans medical sensitive gender appropriate medical care for minors in Tennessee and Kentucky. That's before the Supreme Court right now. Probably those bans will be allowed to stand. That would mean that there'll be a ban on medical care for minors in pretty much all red states, I would predict. Public opinion is that 56% of Americans support this ban. And I think that something that Ari said at the very beginning is important to highlight. There was sort of this wave, this very cynical wave of misinformation in 2024 about trans people and trans lives. And not to be too political, but if there was one thing that I wish the Democrats had done differently, it was respond to that wave rather than just ignore it and pretend it wasn't happening because it was a bad political issue. As a result, over the last 3 years, from 2022 to 2025, basically all of the public opinion markers have shifted 10% in the wrong direction. In other words, 10% in a less supportive and less affirming way. And I'll put in the chat in a minute, not while I'm speaking, cites to a very new Pew Research survey, which has all of this data. So only of I just mentioned 56% of Americans support banning medical care for minors, only 26% support medical care for minors with 17% undecided. Even for adult care, the Trump administration is engaging in nationwide blackmail against hospitals and entire hospital chains, right? There's been a lot of consolidation in the healthcare industry. And so if one hospital in a chain offers gender surgery, right, gender confirmation surgery, the entire chain could lose all of its Medicaid funding and all of its other governmental funding. That's going to be challenged, but that's where it is. Interestingly, by the way, even though more than half of Americans want to ban medical care for minors, 56% say they want policies protecting trans people from discrimination, just highlighting the kind of confusion and misinformation.
And
Obviously, there are sports bans.
Wait,
Sorry?
Jay, I want to hear, Ari, did you have a question?
Yeah,
Just to add to that point, a lot of what's coming out of the White House or, from this rhetoric generally is framed in the direction of like protecting kids, protecting real women. Like none of it is, or little of it is framed as like take away these people's rights. It's all sort of framed in this misleading way where it's like we're protecting children who, are too naive or being too brainwashed to know what's best for them.
As Tracy Chapman said, why are the missiles called peacekeepers?
Right. Yeah, just as an anecdote on that. So 3 days after the election, I was on CNN and one of my co-panelists referred to the sports issue as boys playing girls sports. And I interrupted him and I really kind of had it out on the air. And I then went viral on the right, which is not something that I recommend. And just judging anecdotally from the kind of hate mail that I got, so I got avalanche, not just social mentions, but also snail mail. People found my address, which was a little bit scary. The vast majority was really ignorant in terms of they thought that boys were supposed to use girls' bathrooms because we want more like sex and stuff. Like they saw this as sex. They didn't see it as about it wasn't even misunderstanding. Like, oh, I get what trans is, but I think it's wrong or something. It wasn't just what Ari said. It wasn't about that. It's been framed as protecting girls. Almost entirely, it's framed in that way. and that has worked. And I haven't seen, obviously we have a lot of stuff that progressives want to fight about right now, but I haven't seen the kind of investment that we need in this issue to push back on that. 66% of Americans support that sports ban, but that's again based on total misinformation. Bathroom bans we've seen. Insurance is increasingly not covering gender affirming medical care. Schools are being banned on a state level from teaching anything about gender identity, but that's going to change on a federal level as well, using again funding as a club to say, like, if you in a blue state want your schools to teach science about gender, you're going to lose all of your federal education funding, and that's going to happen more as the Department of Education is taken away.
Can I stop and ask you just like one question about that? Because I was reading a very disturbing article about the state of Texas, Governor Abbott saying that he wants to define a teacher affirming a child's gender as potentially child abuse.
That's right. And parents seeking medical care for a trans child as child abuse.
Does that have legs in the courts? Like, do you see that as political rhetoric, or do you see that as like a legitimate threat of this could be the law of the
That is a legitimate threat, and there are parents in Texas who have already been targeted by the state attorney general in Texas. So trans has also been used as part of the war on higher education, as we just saw regarding Penn. Anyone who thinks that the stuff against Columbia was about anti-Semitism should now recognize that this is a war on higher education using any pretext, including being supportive of trans athletes. We talked about denationalizing trans people and removing the X gender marker. I think just more broadly, it's pretty shocking, considering that two trans women played a role in the Stonewall uprisings, that the official Stonewall, National Park website says LGB people. There's never been an LGB acronym. I remember when it was GLBT and then it was switched to LGBT, right, to not put the men first all the time. And but there was never, that's a new thing. There's no such thing as LGB. And this is true government-wide on all government websites. Any information about gender has been removed from not just HHS websites, but any government website. And I think the last thing I want to say, so what science and lived experience has been replaced with, right? So there's actual people living their lives, and there's also science. And both of those have been redefined. So the people living their lives have been pathologized as mentally ill, and the science has been redefined as quote unquote gender ideology, which is also not a thing, right? There's empirical data. That's the basis of the science. And I want to make it clear, and give permission to people in the, here with us tonight. It's fine to have a lot of questions and even doubts around particular medical interventions, around what's right for you or for your child, around sort of the edges about how we understand gender. No one expects you to have a PhD in gender studies when you become a parent. That is fine. And I want to make space for that. That's very different from saying there's no science, no medicine, no empirical data, and most importantly, no people living their actual lives, right? So that's why I kind of had that blow up on CNN. It's one thing to talk about sports, but as probably most people on this call know, am I allowed to say bullshit on this call? That is all bullshit. We're talking about a tiny number of people, and it's being used as a wedge issue rather, to really try to just erase transness as a category. And that has now happened. I would just want to say the last thing. I think not just due to 2024, but due to the last 5 years, particularly of media discourse, there's been a real erosion of understanding, openness, and support, even among what we would say as moderates or liberals. There are people, journalists like Jesse Singal in The Atlantic and Pamela Paul in the New York Times, who distorted the science, who platformed junk science, who would highlight the stories of a very small number of detransitioners, people who regretted their gender transition. The regret rate for gender transition is lower than for any large number of medical interventions, including just plastic surgery. And yet this was made into a phenomenon. And we'll talk more about our response. I don't want to keep talking, a lot of Jay talking, I'm almost done. But I would just say there's that Jewish teaching, "Da lifnei mi ata omed," know before whom you stand. And that's true not just in our relationships with the divine as we understand that, but also with other people. And I meet well-meaning people, really well-meaning people all the time who have been fed a diet of misinformation. And so we want to approach that with empathy and also not with the assumption that people are all on the same page, because they're really not.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And just
I
to like
want to just, yeah, okay. Ari, go ahead and respond, and then I have like a couple of questions that I want to ask you, but I want to
for
just
sure.
let you have whatever instant response you have, go.
Just to highlight that point about how powerful a simple bit of misinformation can be, can everybody like raise their Zoom hands if you've heard of transgender mice?
Oh, yes.
Anywhere in the media, transgender mice. Yeah,
Turning
a
the
lot
mice
of people.
transgender. Yes.
Um, and I think, a lot of us who are like transgender mice, like that doesn't make any sense, would sort of like laugh that off. Because obviously it's transgenic mice, which are a huge part of biomedical research and very important and not at all related to being transgender. But it just goes to show you, if you sort of skate over that, or if nobody combats it, like Jay was saying, nobody clarifies, for people who don't, know or don't catch that, that can really spiral out of control. So it only takes like a little bit of misinformation to do a lot of damage.
Yes. All right. I want to ask you, Ari, to respond to a couple of the things that I heard in Jay's exhaustive list. No, it wasn't exhaustive. It was just
I wish it
actually
was exhaustive. Yeah.
selected, but it was rather lengthy. Um, one of the things that I always have questions about, and I'd love to just hear your perspective on this, is, when people start to pathologize trans, a lot of what they say is, well, this is a kind of mental illness. And the trans people themselves talk about how the suicidal ideation is so high and we need to save trans people and protect them. And like, I think about how that plays out when I see something like the sign "Protect Trans Kids." And I think like, how do you as a trans teen like feel about, do you want people to see you as vulnerable? Do you want people to see you as strong? Like, how do you feel about like just the emotional valence of that discourse?
I mean, I have a couple of responses to that. The first being, as Jay said, a lot of these people are genuinely very well-meaning but misinformed. So, the people who want to help children who seem to be struggling emotionally or socially, like have good intentions, I would hope. But first of all, yeah, trans has been thought of as a mental illness. It's been in the DSM. It's been removed from the DSM. It's no longer gender identity disorder in the DSM, but there is, I believe, a DSM code for dysphoria. But being transgender or genderqueer, or just I'll say non-cisgender to encompass everything, is by no means a new thing. You can see in many indigenous populations from all over the world that it's an identity that has existed for a long, long time. And so it's certainly not some kind of new thing or new disorder as many people seem to think it is. The more, globalized the world becomes, the more social media there is, the more information people have, the more you may see people like sharing their stories, but it's not because people are just suddenly becoming trans. As far as the mental health aspect goes, I think it is true and would be sort of irresponsible to deny the fact that the data shows that trans people have higher rates of emotional struggles, whether that be sort of anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, what may have you. But that is not about being trans in a void. That is about the kind of social and political response to trans people that we've been talking about this whole time. Being trans doesn't inherently come with like a co-diagnosis of depression or any of that. It is about the same as any marginalized identity. Like there are many studies, there are whole fields of research that show that like being part of a minority group literally affects your biology and health on the molecular level. Because when the world, when you're not the dominant group, then the world responds to you in a way that like lets you know that. So being part of any minority group can cause these I guess like mental health comorbidities, so to speak. And I think it is really important to address that and provide support for kids who are going through that. But again, going back to Jay's point about data, studies show that like conversion therapy, denying trans kids like a space to have community and healthcare and whatever kind of support they need doesn't help those issues, it worsens them. So in the effort of protecting trans kids, we should acknowledge those issues, and we should acknowledge that they come from society, not from being trans, and we should provide support and validation, not like a shutdown, if that makes sense in my mind.
Yes, and I think I want to just affirm what Jay said earlier. There is ample research that says that when you are supportive and when people do have healthcare, the outcomes are better.
Yeah.
Like, you know, there is ample research. So I do think like it is important to stress that and say like the science tells us this as well. And what you're describing is when any human is under daily stress because the outside world is looking at them and trying to police them in one way or another, it is going to have a mental and spiritual impact. And I think like that is absolutely what is part of what this story here. When
This quote in the chat says exactly what I'm trying to say, but in slightly better wording. Someone got to edit that before they heard it, and I just
yeah. So
And I want to just quickly add one little Jewish piece to this specifically, which is that, so the quote is perfect, but I think it just went to hosts. We could cut and paste that so it goes to everyone in the chat. That it's stigma, right? And the same is true for systemic racism, right? So people of color have demonstrably worse health outcomes in a whole range of indicators. And that's not them, right? That's the systemic racism baked into healthcare, and we can go have a whole other conference call about that. I would also say that stigma is sometimes invisibility. And at this moment, speaking as a rabbi, I know there are a bunch of other rabbis on the call. If we don't talk about this, that perpetuates, especially now with what's being called like the vibe shift, right? It's tragic, I think, that this is the case, but I think those of us who are cisgender, we need to re-normalize just being trans by talking about the gender spectrum that's existed, exactly as Ari said, throughout history. Obviously, the medical interventions that we have for trans people are relatively new, but that's also true for Elon Musk's hair implants and jaw implant that he got done.
we
So
won't
like,
mention any other implants. Okay,
right?
yes.
Who knows? So that's not like that. Just being neutral. And there was a great study that Keshet did on this many years ago around LGBTQ people in general. Like, without having the welcome sign, the perception is unwelcome, right?
Yeah.
And so that's one. And here I think doubly so, because there is a perception. The vibe shift is up to us, right? That famous line that's now famous: do not comply in advance. We do not need to change how we live in the world because there's some sort of perceived vibe shift emanating from Washington, D.C. And I think a lot of that is on clergy, and a lot of it is excavating the history of the gender spectrum in Jewish and other sources, and just making clear that this is part of the diversity of creation, which we celebrate all the time.
1,000%. And
I
as I just want to add one thing, like as a rabbi, like I value the uniqueness of every human. And the uniqueness of every human means that like any category is really going to be limiting that person's expression. Ari, you wanted to say something, I cut you off.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, as far as support from cisgender allies goes, not everybody necessarily has the capacity to be, going out to protests every day, or in Congress making laws. But it can be as simple as sort of, you'll notice that like a lot of people here have their pronouns after their names, normalizing that so it's not, if it's just trans people including their pronouns, then it's very isolating and sort of like outs trans people in a way. But just sort of normalizing even little things like that, are a great way to show you're an ally, and create a more inclusive, supportive space. So
Okay.
like everyone has something they can do.
Beautiful message. All right, Ari, I'm going to now ask you a much more challenging question about a very different vibe shift. I know we've talked a little bit about this, So this is not going to shock you, but I'm as Jay was describing, like, I'm part of like that cis dad world, okay? And I talk to lots of parents are who have expressed to me, and this is partially because of uninformed voices informing their opinions. They have expressed to me lots of fear about trans children in particular. And it comes from a place where they say things like, I heard about this girl who went to Jewish summer camp, and like she went to camp and then like every girl in her bunk came back and they all said that they were trans at the end of the summer. And it's this kind of contagion language that I hear. Like, um, and it's also like connected to summer camp, which is about romance and sexuality and sexual expression. So like it's it's coming at a place of like I definitely think it has a transphobic element or even a homophobic and transphobic element, but it's coming at a place where it's saying that, oh, it's just the current fad or what have you. Like, how do you respond when you hear if you've I don't know if you've heard people say that kind of thing. So what do you suggest is like the reality for young people that are, being introduced for the first time to maybe someone who is trans and thinking about their own sexuality and identity?
Sure. So disclaimer, I'm obviously not a parent myself. But I do a lot of work with children. I work at a summer camp. And I am a trans kid. So I have a couple responses to that. One being what I said earlier, that trans identities have been around a long time. This is not a new thing. But there is more visibility and awareness now. So you might see more people coming out, more people publicly sharing their stories. So I think that sort of not in terms of summer camp specifically, but in terms of this general idea that there are more trans people now, I think that might be a large contributor. The more sort of support and visibility there is out there, the more safe people feel to come out, the more empowered they feel by this new knowledge. People who wouldn't have had words to describe what they're feeling now maybe do. In terms of the summer camp specific thing, I imagine, and I know in my own family, it can be very hard for parents to, um, relinquish that kind of, when you're sending your kids to summer camp, they're like, living with, counselors, sleeping, eating for, often for overnight camps, like for a couple weeks, I think that can be very hard for parents, especially if your kids are having so much fun that they're not writing home as much as you'd like. And so there's just a
Sure.
lot of, uncertainty whenever you're entrusting like the most precious person in the world to you, to someone else's care. And I totally get why that is nerve-wracking. Um, I do think it's true that summer camp may be a place where, because kids are away from their parents often for the first time, it's a place to explore things they may not feel comfortable exploring at home. Also, kids feel often, I know I felt nervous going away to summer camp, like you're living with these totally random strangers who you may never have met before, and you're just gonna like live with them for a couple weeks. And there can be some pressure to fit in, whether that's lying about your favorite color to match the other kids, or like, you know, something bigger, like going to horseback riding when you'd rather go to swimming, whatever it is. There is this kind of
For sure.
idea of fitting in, finding community, and common identities is a way that a lot of us find community. A lot of us here are Jewish. We're on this, Jewish oriented Zoom here. That's a common identity to a lot of us. And we may find comfort in that. It's not, sort of a new thing. Um, and so this combination, I think, of like freedom and new knowledge, new chances to explore things, and some perhaps pressure to fit in may lead children to explore different things about themselves. I think it's important to say that like exploring different facets of your identity is very important. And just because you explore something doesn't mean you're married to that for the rest of your life, like just because you're like,
Sure.
I might, enjoy soccer, or I might, be into girls as a girl myself. It doesn't mean you've decided that you are going to be a professional soccer player. It doesn't mean you've decided that you are gay now and that is immutable and set in stone. I think it's really, really important to give kids and everybody the space to explore different parts of who they are. without sort of freaking out about every little development, if possible. Because for basically everyone, I'd say coming out is not like you wake up and you're gay. It's a really is a process of realizing your own identity and learning about yourself. Um, I got a little off
Can
topic.
I jump in with one little information bit there, misinformation bit? Like, part of what's in the background, I think, of that question is the right-wing misinformation that, like, it's really easy to just transition. And this is not
Mm.
the reality, right? Certainly not medically, right? Socially transitioning, sure, which just means how you identify to others, right? And that could be, so there's that, but literally there was a commercial, a Trump commercial that ran around in the summer and fall that, like, this kid went to school in one gender and they came home a different gender, as if like they had actually had some kind of medical process or something like that in a single school day. Whereas in fact, and there's still a myth, right, that surgery is like the leading. If you see why people are against trans medical care, it's because they associate it with surgery, right? Which is generally, it's not entirely, but bottom surgery is very, very, very difficult, almost impossible to get for people under 18. Top surgery is relatively rare. Like even when we're talking about medical intervention, it's more about either hormones or puberty blockers, right? Something like that. But that's not even that is that the end of a long process, right? It's not just like I went to summer camp and I am thinking about my gender. That is exactly, I think, what Ari just said. Like, I'm exploring, I'm questioning, I'm not sure, or maybe I am sure, but it still takes a while. And yet, I think in the background of that fear is that there's something irrevocable that's going to happen to my child that's out of my control. And that is a really primal parental fear.
And I think a big part of this fear, and I know this has come up in my own family, is not just the fear that your child will discover something about themselves, but that you will, as a parent, will be left out of the conversation, that you'll be excluded from your child's life and experience in some way. And I think that, again, I'm not a parent, but I think one of the scariest things for a parent is the idea that your child is going through something hard alone and they do not feel safe or they cannot come to talk to you, and you will just be sort of like on the outside of a glass wall watching them go through this alone, unable to reach them. And so I think that is a really big fear that I see in my own experience. And I think, sorry, I'm seeing some of the questions in the chat and I'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah, we'll
um
get there in a sec.
but I just think like that's a really big fear, and I think it can lead parents to try to maybe like worry about these things, try to like keep their children away from these things that they fear will lead them down that path. But I think like as anyone grows up, they discover things for themselves, but especially in this age of like social media and so much access to information, misinformation and real information, the best thing you can do for your child, in my opinion, is not to try and shield them from everything, but to like hold their hand through it, stay in dialogue, make them know that you are someone they can come to. And they may not come to you about every little thing. That's natural. That's part of getting, growing up and becoming independent. But if you make your child know that like if they ever need you, you will be there for them, and that your love for them is more powerful than any, question they could have or any like idea, then like that's sort of the fundamental bond that supports all relationships. And I think that's more than trying to guide your child to any one outcome, that's the most important thing you can do, is to make them know that no matter what, you're there, you'll talk them through it, you'll support them. So that's my take on
Thank
that.
you so much, Ari. I really want to bring in our third panelist at this point because this is the perfect moment to bring in our third panelist, Dr. Katya Gerwein, a pediatrician, works in California at Stanford, and a parent of two trans young adults. And you just heard Ari. I mean, I was loving all those hearts. I was feeling them too. I was loving Ari's explanation. But can you just share a little bit about the journey that you had as a parent, and the challenges along the journey? You have two very different children with very different paths, but could you share a little bit about your story and what you learned and the messages that you really want to put out there, for any parent who is, um, thinking about how to support their child?
Sure. And I just want to say kudos to Ari. That was beautifully expressed and right. Exactly what I would say too. So sure. I have two kids. Aviva is my older kid, and she's now an adult at 24, just turned, and Jesse is about to be 21. Um, and they each had their own journey. You know, Aviva came out to us as bi in seventh grade, and then gay in eighth grade, and then gender fluid in ninth grade. And then went to college and came home and told us that she was a woman. Um, and has a wonderful trans community in New York, where she lives, and a lot of great friends and good support. Jesse came out to us as gay in middle school, but was really into makeup and women's dresses, but said not trans. Um, and then senior year in high school said, actually, I'm non-binary. And this past year said, I'm trans femme. And I think my basic message with kids is to know that you're there as loving support and to hear where they are. And that might change with time, you know? And you can't necessarily predict the journey any person's on for anything, right? Like when people explore Judaism, you can't predict like, you know, where they're going to end up. And, you know, or, you know, anything in life, when you explore something, you don't know which path is where it's taking you. And that as a parent, as any parent knows, you are there to really create an open, loving, and trusting relationship with your kid so that you can support them. Because sometimes as an adult, you might have access to information that they don't, but you don't know the inside of them as
When you,
much as they do.
mm, okay, I love that. You don't know the inside of them as much as they do. I love that line. When you think back 11 or 12 years when this, when you were
Yeah.
first like, talking about this and talking to your friends about it, what do you remember from that time? Did you find some friends supportive, some friends not supportive? What was it like as a parent to begin to think differently about these things?
I think, you know, that we live in a really supportive community in Berkeley.
Hmm.
So that made my kids' lives easier. You know, they were always welcomed and accepted at shul, although many people had and have difficulty with they them pronouns just as a grammatical kind of just thing. But in general, it's very loving and supportive. I would say, you know, as you talked about earlier, Jay and Ari, that there are, you know, certain worries that people have, like, is this just a popular thing in the schools? Is this just a trend? Is this, you know, like, so there are concerns that come up. Um, but I would say in general, everybody was very supportive.
And what was supportive for you as a parent? Did you turn to other parents of trans children? Like,
Yeah,
what
yeah,
was that like? Was that easy to access? Was that
very easy to access.
okay? Great.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say because it is a more supportive community here, I think more kids feel comfortable saying what they're feeling and being open with whatever changes come as they feel different things
Mm.
from generally a fairly young age. Um, and you know, like Ari referenced, like you might decide to go horseback riding just because everybody else is horseback riding, and then be like, you know what, horseback riding is actually not my thing, you know. And so I think that's one of the beauties of living in a supportive community is that kids feel more freedom to explore how they're feeling and then make those changes as they feel their inner selves uh, becoming more and more clear to them.
Mm. Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing your experience and your story. Ari, I see you have a hand up, so I'm gonna pass it over to you for whatever comment you want to share.
Cool. I've been seeing a lot of questions come in the chat, and I thought Dr. Gerwein's take as a parent gave me a good segue into my answer to them, if that's cool.
I love your thinking. Yes.
There's lots of questions, and some of them are like a while ago, so I can't find all of them, but I think a lot of them kind of boil down to like, what should I do as a parent if my kid X? You know, what should I do if my kid is also considering these colleges, or what should I do if my kid doesn't want to have doesn't want to be super out and proud, just wants to be stealth, or what should I do if my kid wants to medically transition? And I know this might be not the most satisfying answer that I could give, but I just really want to back up what I said before and what Dr. Gerwein has been saying. The most important thing you can do is be in conversation with your kid. There's no one right answer about what to do for your kid in a certain situation. It varies by family, it varies by kid, it varies by time, whatever. It's like impossible to isolate the variable, basically. So as far as the legal advice on traveling goes, I'll leave that to Rabbi Jay and other people. But as far as the what should I do for my kid if, there's no perfect answer. Just stay in conversation with them. You know, do what you feel you need to do as a parent in your capacity, where your role is to protect them and look out for them and guide them in the world, especially because, you know, we don't have fully developed prefrontal cortexes until 25, even though we're legally adults at 18. But really, yeah, like Dr. Gerwein has been saying, just stay in conversation. Things change. The most important thing is to give your support and respect them as a person, respect that they know themselves best. You may have more world experience, but like Dr. Gerwein said, they know what's inside them. So, you know, find that balance between being a protective, knowledgeable parent and letting them be who they are and speak for themselves and make mistakes for themselves if they need to and figure out and learn from that.
And also, I just want to add, and you can bring in new information that they might not know. You can say, hey, let's look at the study together, or what do you think about X, Y, and Z that I'm seeing here?
Totally. Yeah. If you know something, you know, instead of saying I know it and this is my decision, bring it into the conversation, you know, I know this is my experience. What do you think of that?
Beautiful. So I see we have some questions in the chat. Jay, do you want to
yeah, probably this is my last up because I know we want to hear from Jamie and Katya too, and I'm just noting the time. So sure. I wanted to be responsive to some of the rabbi questions that came through. First, Katya Renee asked about well, what are some tachlis specific things? And I had 4 specific things that clergy or rabbinic or religious leaders might consider. And these are evidence-based. This comes from data about what actually moves. We want to think as activists about the movable middle, right? There is no point, roughly 30% of Americans believe that it is morally wrong to have a gender identity different from quote unquote biological sex. There is not much point in spending any time with trying to persuade those people, right? There is a big movable 40% middle that swings on this issue. And that's who we want to address, right? We want to talk to the folks whose minds and hearts are in some way open or which can be broken. I just remember what Quentin Crisp said, that people get stupid wholesale, but they get wise retail. This is a great illustration of that, right? There is a lot of wholesale stupidity being peddled deliberately, right, for political gain. It's not like a mystery why this is happening. And so it's a retail sale. It's often in a conversation more than in a sermon. All right, so here are my 4 things. The first, the data is that real people and stories change hearts. Rights talk and science talk do not. Now, sorry, but we tried this in the gay marriage context to talk about rights. It did not work. It failed miserably. It turned into special rights. Pick 1 or 2 stories and tell them over and over again. It could be a story of someone who transitioned and flourished. It doesn't have to be a tragedy. Or it could be a story of a child, who had a challenge in school. There are a lot of these online, amazing parents telling stories. That's 1. Real people and stories, not rights and science. 2, this is a religious opportunity, right? This is a positive religious thing. Our fundamental values support learning from people, just like you said earlier, Dan. Respect, diversity, love, listening, empathy. This is not like a tough choice between our faith and supporting people in their whole spectrum of gender, right? So center your own personal religion story and for faith story. Third, I want to like weave in the spectrum of gender into not just on Pride Month, but into like regular, sermons every week in Divrei Torah, right? There are gender nonconforming people all over the Torah. Jacob, Yaakov, right? Like Leah, Miriam, Deborah, Ruth. Like, it's hard to find anyone who's actually gender typical in this thing. It's bizarre, right? This can just be one of the themes, right? Where you could call like, right, Joseph, right? Queering the Torah, transing the Torah. Like, this is just part of how we do a good Dvar Torah, right? This should not be seen as like the special thing which we just do in the month of June. And finally, the narrative that really does work is what activists call the feel, felt, found narrative. And this is from an ally, not from the queer person themselves. I understand how you feel, the ally says to somebody who is, still figuring it out, because I felt that way. And then I found this, ... Perfect model, Barack Obama's speech about same-sex marriage, or his interview, which was pre-prepared about same-sex marriage. He said, I get it. I understand how people feel. I grew up that marriage was between a man and a woman. That's what I believed. That was my position that I ran on, when I was a candidate. But then I found my daughters are in school and some of their parents have gay moms or gay dads. And I just couldn't see why they shouldn't have the same rights that Michelle and I have. That's like the classic feel, felt, found narrative. It's asking you to be vulnerable about an earlier part on your own journey of understanding, right? Where you reconsidered something that you previously thought you knew. And those four things, I think, are some very practical tachlis steps for how clergy, religious leaders, and just people in conversation, around your Pesach Seder, which, oh my God, is in like 2.5 weeks. I can't believe that, around this issue.
Ari, I want to give you one last word because I know that you had one other thing that you wanted to say, and then we'll pass it to Jamie. Ari, go for it.
So yeah, I think those are all really great points. And I'm of course not a rabbi, but I just wanted to respond to 2 points of that. One being that while I definitely agree sort of about the movable middle and then some people who are more entrenched, definitely I think when you're looking on like a wide scale or like sending out a group message, it's easier to move that middle ground. But I do genuinely think that even many people who you think are more entrenched, maybe people who you know in your own lives, relatives, whoever, are more willing to listen than you think when you approach them individually. There have been studies done where, for example, like there's this one Black man who would go meet up with members of the KKK for lunch and just like have a lunch with them, and just like chat and have them get to know him as a person. Not like coming in to like combat them on, as Jay said, like reason points, but just like from an emotional angle, because as Jay said, that's very compelling. So I think, people have more capacity to change and grow than they may present based on their views. I'd also say, though I've never led like a congregation, I do those lessons for the 8th graders that I talked about, Gender and Sexuality 101. And one thing that I find works very well there, because we acknowledge that everybody's, coming in with different knowledge levels. We set some sort of norms, like ground rules, speak from the I perspective, be respectful, whatnot. And one of the best parts of our sessions that we do is we give them the chance to submit questions through an anonymous Google form. I don't know how it works technologically, but they can scan a QR code and send in anonymous questions. And I think a lot of people may sometimes be embarrassed to admit that they don't know something, especially if they feel like everyone around them does or they're expected to know it. So creating that kind of like judgment-free space, whether or not it's anonymous, for everybody to like ask questions, even if they think it's too basic, is very helpful to get everybody up to speed.
Beautiful. All right. These are all wonderful ideas about what we can actually do to help move the needle and help more people understand some of the beautiful things that were said this evening. For even more of that, we're going to turn it now to Keshet's Jamie Krass, who's joining us tonight, to tell us a little bit about what Keshet has been up to, and particularly about a thing that everyone can sign on to be part of this. Jamie.
Yes, thank you so much. And oh, there we go. Let's see if that audio is better. All right, thank you so much. Yes, I've been hearing so much hunger in the chat, and I'm so grateful to be hearing this hunger to take action. But first, I want to start by really thanking Ari for your leadership. Thank you so much for being a leader and expert on this call tonight. And I want to thank Dr. Gerwein and Rabbi Michaelson for your expertise, and you, Rabbi Brenner, for your wonderful facilitation. I'm Jamie Krass. I use she, her pronouns. I'm Keshet's National Director of Youth Programs. So Keshet is a leading organization that works for the full equality of LGBTQ Jews and our families in Jewish life. And we do this through our education and training work, which focuses on meeting Jewish institutions and communities where they're at and bringing them along on a journey that equips them with the skills to be the communities of belonging that all their LGBTQ community members deserve. We also do this through our community mobilization work, which includes grassroots and national campaigns to promote LGBTQ rights and equipping Jewish individuals with the skills to be able to advocate for LGBTQ rights in their own lives and communities, and through our community building opportunities and leadership development opportunities for LGBTQ Jewish youth. We work with over 1,200 in a given year, and also for LGBTQ Jews of color. So I wanted to give that quick snapshot, but really I want to get to what we're here to do together today, which is to take action. Harkening back to something that Ari shared earlier today, so much about what we can do right now has to do with what he mentioned, which is staying in conversation, not just with the people in our own lives, but in the conversation around trans rights right now. So what I'd love to invite folks to do, and if we have slides that we're able to share, are we able to share, or may I share my screen? Great.
Deborah's
I would like to invite everyone to sign the Jewish pledge to affirm the dignity of trans, non-binary, and intersex people. And I'll be putting this in the chat as well. And what this entails is it is an opportunity for you to continue to be part of the conversation. Keshet launched this pledge in response to the escalating attacks on trans rights at the federal as well as state level. The ACLU is currently tracking over 520 anti-LGBTQ pieces of legislation. Over 420 of them are advancing. So this is really an opportunity for you to make your opinion known, to make it known that you do affirm the dignity of trans, non-binary, and intersex people, and that you do so because you are Jewish, because this is living your Jewish values. What this signing this pledge also entails is the opportunity for you or your organization to join Thrive. So if you are here tonight because you are representing a Jewish organization, be that a synagogue, a day school, a summer camp, a federation, what have you, you will have the opportunity when you fill out this pledge to join Thrive. Thrive is the Jewish coalition to defend trans and LGBTQ plus youth. It entails being part of a coalition that gathers monthly to explore different calls to action, to receive a bit of a debrief on what the landscape is looking like. And again, to be able to bring this knowledge and these skills back to your communities to create actionable change. So that QR code on this page as well will also take you to the pledge page. I wanted to keep it on both in case folks didn't have a chance to use it during the first slide. But I really urge you, take this action right now. Let this be one of the many actions you are already taking, and let this be one more step on the journey that you are going to be following to build the world that every single person, including trans, non-binary, and intersex people, deserve.
Thank you so much, Jamie. I also know that there are some opportunities to be part of some retreats for teenagers. Could you just say a little bit about where people could find out more information if they're interested in sending their teens on a Keshet experience?
Inviting me to talk about my absolute favorite part about working at Keshet.
Fantastic.
So our youth programs entail a variety of different opportunities for young LGBTQ folks. We define this age range actually now 11 to 24. We are launching our first ever program for tweens this week, actually tomorrow night. But what we offer at Keshet are online affinity spaces that are led by and for LGBTQ young folks, meaning that those spaces are entirely curated and facilitated by young LGBTQ folks, whether they are teens or young adults, depending on the space you're choosing. And we also provide weekend retreat experiences, Shabbatonim for plural. And these are, again, also led by and for young LGBTQ folks. There are steering committees that work together for 6 months to craft a totally unique weekend-long experience for LGBTQ Jewish teens. The next one is taking place in a couple weeks. Registration is closed. We are at capacity and have a wait list, but you're welcome to join the wait list. And then we have another one taking place in the Pacific Northwest in November. Typically, we offer 3 in a year, 1 in the Midwest, 1 on the East Coast, 1 on the West Coast, but they are not region specific, meaning young folks fly in from all over the US and also from Canada and sometimes from abroad to be able to join us at these weekend retreats, because they themselves are highly subsidized down to only costing $54, which is waivable. And we offer very generous travel scholarships, thanks to our generous supporters, to at times completely cover airfare. We don't want there to be any financial barriers to young folks having a magical weekend together.
Amazing. And, you know, as we heard about some of the depressing things, it's nice to think about some of the optimistic things that people can do and encourage the teens in their lives to do. So thank you so much, Jamie, for joining us and helping us all with some action steps.
Thank you. If you don't mind, may I actually close with my little piece with a quote, centering again the amazing folks that we get to work with every day. So this was a message that was sent by a young member of our community who's 16 years old, following the inauguration and the first slew of federal level attacks on LGBTQ rights. They wrote, "I'm sending my community love. Reminder to everyone that queer existence is resistance. They're trying so hard to get rid of us, but it's never going to work. I think they don't get that we won't just give up and stop fighting for our rights. They can pass as many laws as they want, but that won't change who we are, and they can't get rid of our community." So joy can be found. Joy, I would say, is actually a radical form of resistance. And I hope we can all find that together in these days ahead.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
Visibility is next week for anybody looking to, celebrate that kind of thing.
Yes. Yes, that was actually the reason that we were doing this webinar, was to be preparing ourselves spiritually for that. So one of the questions that came up in the chat, and I do think that is really important to say this, is what are we doing to educate wider Jewish community? What can rabbis and cantors do? What can Jewish educators do? One of the things that Moving Traditions focuses on is something that almost every Jewish community does, which is train people for bar, bat, and bar mitzvah. And as part of that, one of the things that we do is we offer family education. And in that family education, just learning the existence of the bar mitzvah and learning the gender history of that ritual is core to that experience. We also offer Rosh Chodesh, Shevet, and Selem, 3 gender affinity spaces for communities, as well as Kulam, which is a program which really is geared towards teens and looks at their own lives, their relationships, and the wider world. And we're doing lots of work with summer camps and Israel travel programs to make those spaces safer spaces on a number of different fronts for teens. So there's a lot of things that we're doing that are working in partnership with institutions, but also we have opportunities for teens to be part of longer experiences where they are working with a cohort in community with other teens. J Girls Plus Magazine, the Koleinu Fellowship, and Kumi Foundation and Kumi Exploration. You can read more about all of these things on the Moving Traditions website. I just want to say that right now, these are open and we're taking applications. And I think if you wanted to hear from any of the Koleinu participants of the past, I can tell you they will share that it was a incredibly powerful experience. Ari and I talked about Ari's experience, and he said that in particular, he really got mentorship from one of our leaders, one of my colleagues. So that made me feel great. And I just want to say that in addition to thinking about programs, we also are thinking about what we can do online. And we have a program that is launching with Galia Godel, who's a superb educator who is in the Philadelphia area, but is launching a program of Selem that is going to be online, and people can sign up now. This is a wonderful opportunity over 3 Monday evenings for young people to connect with each other and to get really support from somebody who has a lot to offer. So all of those opportunities are things that you can learn more about, and I hope you will. And now it is my real honor and pleasure to welcome on one of my colleagues, Rabbi Tamara Cohen. And I know, Tamara, you and Jay have a long, long history. I heard about that when I had lunch with Jay. So Jay said, it kind of is perfect that Tamara is going to be ending this evening. So I just want to just turn the floor over to you, and if you want to share whatever you want to share, and end us with a moment of connection.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Ari. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Jay. Yes, we were teens together in a different moment.
Almost 40 years ago.
Almost 40 years ago. In a moment where, in a certain way, we couldn't see some of the progress that we have been part of making happen, and that we have witnessed in LGBTQ policy, law changes, and Jewish life, and also some of the backlash. And I draw from that just and so much from Ari. Hope that we'll get there again. So we've heard so much wisdom from rabbis and teachers really are our rabbis, even if they are young and not ordained. And we just wanted to end with a moment of blessing. This is actually a moment of blessing that comes in our Bar Mitzvah program, that happens in communities, hundreds of communities around the country, where, as part of preparing for a Bar Mitzvah, parents have an opportunity to bless their child, and they are given options of how to bless their child, options that introduce the idea of non-binary Hebrew, and that really invite parents and children to be in conversation about the best way to talk to one another and offer one another blessing in ways that are expansive, and not only be like our ancestors, many of whom, yes, broke gender norms and were themselves possibly gender nonconforming, certainly, but also be like God, who self-identified as one who is always becoming, with this idea of be who you are, and may you be blessed in all that you are. And so I want to just invite any adult who is here, whether it is for your own child or for children in general, to get to know the various ways of saying this blessing. You can say it on mute, you can unmute, and we can hear the cacophony, but I will say it with you. Hayeh asher tihiyah, hayeh baruch ba'asher tihiyah. Be who you are, trans, non-binary, queer, beautiful children of all ages. Be who you are, and may you be blessed in all that you are. May you be protected under the wings of Shekhinah. And parents, rabbis, clergy, adults, may we be planted like trees, solid in our support, in our knowledge of what is right. And may we take risks, also following in the tradition of risk takers in our communities, to speak up for what's right, to protect what is good and right, and to protect our children in the true ways they need protection, and not in the made up and politically expedient ways that are being used. Thank you all for being here tonight, and may we gather also in better times.
Amen. Thank you so much, Tamara. There is, of course, as always, a link if you want to give us some feedback. We always love to learn. There's a very, very short survey that helps us learn. But again, I just want to thank all of our panelists, Ari, Jay, and Katya, and thank our guests, Jamie and Tamara, for making this evening such a optimistic evening, even though we are in a very challenging time. Our goal, as always, is to support Jewish teens. And thank you for joining us on this journey.